Welcome back to another video, folks. It's been a while, but hopefully this will be a more interesting one for many of you. This is going to cover archery, namely getting fletchings onto arrows. So what do you need to fletch onto arrows? Well, first thing you need is your tools. So you need suitable tape, you need a hard metal rule or ruler, Stanley knife or cutting instrument, you need fletchings or feathers. This is a feather and this is a fletching that's not been prepared for an arrow. Now, in this example, this is off a pheasant, which isn't really suitable for arrows, although you could at a pinch. And what you got to do is to get this to something looking like this. Although this is a different type of bird, by the way, so it's not going to look the same, obviously. You need to basically split down the middle here, all the way down here. You need to split down the middle with the Stanley knife, and that'll basically get you something looking like. This will get you something looking like this. Obviously, this is off a turkey, so it looks completely different. But you get the principle. The principle of it splitting down the middle is so you end up with a fletching on this side and a fletching on the other side. And if you make sure they're all from the same wing, they should all have this offset, this slight offset to the left. It's like a step off to the left, not off to the right. Because if you look here, you notice how it's more flush. That denotes what wing it's from. The next thing you're going to need to do when you're making your fletchings for your arrow, you need to measure them appropriately, because you're not going to use something this long for an arrow unless you want an insane amount of drag and braking action on it. Something like a flu-through arrow would be an example of that, although you would not use a turkey feather for a flu-through arrow. I think it would be the wrong sort to use, although you could use it if you wished. So you need 3 fletchings like this for the length of arrow. I'm going to show you what it's for. The reason for that is you're not going to get enough for 2 fletchings off one unless you went for 4 inches or less. Now, the sort of arrow that I make are normally 4, 5 and sometimes even just under 6. So it's going to be meaning I use 3 of these. So what do? The first thing to do is you need something to mark it with. And I normally measure from this end up. So basically this is what I'm measuring off. And I use this as the starter point. This is going to be for a 5-inch fletching. So take it all the way to there like that. Normally I'd use a pen for this, but as usual when I'm making the video there's not a pen to hand. I just keep continually clipping away at it. That was quite smooth. And there you go. Now this is not waste. I normally keep this if ever I need to use like something for a 3 or a 4-inch fletching. So I'll start with the one. Normally what I do is I cut 3 of these, or cut a whole set off, and then I've got a whole bunch that are all matched. And that brings me on to the second big part of doing this. When you're making your fletchings, you want to try and get the characteristics as identical as possible, unless they're for yourself and you don't care. But if I'm making this for someone and it's a set, they're going to get a set. They're not going to get like 1/2 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. They're going to get everything as close to matching as possible. So the next stage of what you have to do is this. If you try freehand cutting that, you're not going to end up with a straight cut unless you've got an industrial guillotine or something like this. What I do is, and what a lot of archers do, is they stick it to something like this. You can use decorator's tape as well, but I find that decorator's tape isn't wide enough for fletchings of this magnitude. This is 1 inch high, by the way, just over 1 inch high on the height. So normally what I do is I measure it out to 7 inches on the actual fletch measurements here, and then I just go like that. It doesn't have to be perfect for this. Then what I next do is I don't want to waste all this, so what I do is I make another cut. I find the midway point, which is roughly here. Yeah, I know it's not perfect, I don't cut straight when I'm doing it this style. However, you always end up with a straight edge here. So with that straight edge you flip it over. And then all you do is you stick your fletching to it. Next thing to do is get this stuck onto here. You want to do this as straight as possible, so this line, if you will, the base, is in line with the base of the actual gaffer tape. I try and get it just slightly above what it is, for reasons I'll show you in a minute. For for reasons that are specific to the tool that I use next. You won't always get it this perfect if you're doing a batch, but always try and I get it something looking something like this. Next thing I do is I take something called the Fletch Cutter that I made myself. It's not hard to make though, if anyone's interested. This is a cutting mat used by a former family member, and it was used for like cutting up plastic. If you try doing that with fletchings, your blade will sink into it and it won't actually cut this cleanly. So what I made was a Fletch Cutter of hard wood. And I've also got some gaffer tape on it to basically make up for the marks, because the continual cut lines. So what I do next is I put this, first of all I get it properly onto here, sorry I should have shown you that. Well, usually once you got this part on, it ain't moving anywhere. So the next part is moving it onto here, and what I next do is I've marked, if you see these markings here, they're specific to what I have to do next. I've got a 0 mark and a 1 inch mark and a 5 inch and a 6 inch mark, or I think that's 5.5 and a 6 inch mark. I don't pay too much attention to those numbers here. What I'm looking for is this line, a straight line that goes down to this line here. I confirm that with a carpenter's square, so I know that's straight and that's in line. The next thing to do, put this on here, and I'm basically matching that, not this, that, with that line there. And when I know that's lined up like it is there, I know what my width is. This is all to do, this part I'm just describing to you now, is all to do with how wide, how high the actual fletching is going to be cut. Because I'm not going to just be making a cut like this, because that might be too much. You know, I might want to go slightly lower or slightly lower still. In this case, the clients insisted, or the clients asked for about 1 inch on the actual fletching, similar to a last batch I made. So there's two ways of doing this. You can mark it with a marker pen, or you can cut it. I've got a marker pen handy here, although it's clumsy. First of all, line up the lines. I use that as a guide, the tape, so I know the tape's there. I know I've got to come across to the right slightly, a bit more. And next what I do is I basically mark where the 1 inch mark is, which is what my not a very good mark, but I know to go to the right of it. So now I've got my mark. The next thing to do is get the ruler, a metal ruler, not a plastic one. You want a metal one for what you're going to be doing next. And then what I'm going to do next is the reason why not many people do this, what I'm doing. Not many people can fletch this way, because trust me, you need patience, because you never get this right first time when you're starting out. I get my ruler on so that I can get a razor blade between there and lined up with there. So it's not just a case of going flush up with this and then across like that and down. No, no, no. You do that, you're going to mess it up, or you may actually start to cut into the actual base. So what I do is I normally pull it back slightly, get it in like that. There are some people that I've spoken to about this, and they're saying to me, "Oh, watch rider, don't tell people what you're doing, you're giving away your secrets of fletching." I'm like, yeah, but look guys, I don't fletch full time, I'm only part time. I do it as a hobby more than a fucking profession. There's not enough demand in this country or Europe for being a full time arrowsmith. So I don't really mind if the Chicoms get hold of it, because personally I just don't think they can match our skill ultimately for how we do fletchings and arrows. But that's another story. I'll be talking for another 10 minutes on that if I started. So what you do next is I put a glove on for this next part. You don't have to, but trust me, you might sever a tendon if you mess up without wearing a glove. You're going to basically cut down there like that. That's not just a case, you've got to basically do it in a very precise, hard and firm way, without going off down like this, and without going off and slicing your thumb open. You've got to basically find a fine golden rule, a fine middle way of just coming down cleanly and cutting across, and that is easier said than done. And I'll try and do that for you now without blocking the frickin' camera too much. Okay, the last video I made that you just jumped from, it was I moved the bloody thing off camera too much. That's the problem with this frickin' camera. It doesn't have a turnaround window on it, so you can't glance easily and look. However, I'm going to cut again for you. These are two that have already been cut, and as you can see, they've got very matching characteristics. They're very much almost the same, near as damn it. And I'm just going to do another cut with this one to make it a third time. Now, when I'm going for it, as I said before, I want to make sure I can get my Stanley blade between the actual ruler and the base. I normally have my thumb pressing as hard as I can here. Press down, go straight. Don't come off your mark, whatever you do. Cut into the ruler if you have to, rather than cut that way. And there you go. Clean cut. Don't know if you can see that. Let's check the camera, because it's always playing around. Pull back a bit. There we go. Perfect. I don't have any problems with that. That's exactly how I wanted it. Just like the other two. And then it's always peeling from the front to the back, not the other way around. And that is how you make a trio of fletchings for one arrow. And where is that arrow? It's right here. But waiting. This arrow's ready to go. It's got its arrowhead on it. Just needs some fletchings to go on. Some windings onto the fletchings and some PVA glue. And that is ready to start shooting. Or in my case, ready to send to a client. Okay, and that's all three fletchings now done. The reason there was a break in that was I had to make a last minute trim adjustment to the actual tips here of each fletching, because as I went to turn it, it was getting caught slightly in the extent of the jig for the fletching part. And normally that's not a problem, but because these are slightly longer than my normal batches, which is like normally 4.5 inches, this is 5 inch. It was actually displacing the arrow, so I had to trim all three, and that's why you just saw a break of that. But I got them all trimmed and they're all good as gold now, as we can see. These are just the little idiosyncrasies of arrowsmithing that you've got to be aware of, otherwise it can cause issues. And but it worked out well, and you can see that everything's symmetrical now. That's pretty much a perfect 120 degree displacement from one another, and of course you've got the classic profile of your hen feathers here and your cock feather there. They'll sit nicely against the actual stave as it actually slides off the bow when it goes to shoot. So last but not least for this arrow then is the windings, and that's basically medieval style winding of the whole arrow shaft here, while including the actual fletchings. And I think this was originally done in medieval times, because although they may have glued the fletchings on to the arrow, it may not have been as strong glue as we use now. They'll have probably used pine glue, which is fairly good, but compared to super glue it doesn't quite have the resilience, I don't think. So what they'll have done is they'll have added the windings as added security. And you can still do that anyway with an arrow, because with this arrow, because even with super glue these will come off without being reinforced, at the very least where my finger is here, and at the most all the way up the arrow to the end, just stopping shy of the the self knock windings. So this is always a handy, nice thing to do with an arrow, although it's not necessary for the whole entirety of the arrow shaft. And that's that one arrow ready for that phase. Take a look over here and look how many other arrows that are awaiting all that treatment. I've got 10 arrows there, and around the corner of that shelf is another 4 arrows, and that'll make my 15 arrows if you include the one I've just shown you. So I've got a bit of work ahead of me, folks. You thought what I just showed you was pretty ball aching and finicky. You should try doing 15 sets of those things. That really tests your patience. 45 times the 7, I think it's about 7 steps that you need to go through to make the 15 arrows. But that is another story.